a tense courtroom in Washington, D.C., where arrogance meets intelligence in the most unexpected way. Ethan Walker stood tall before Judge Morton, his shoulders squared, his face calm. The weight of the courtroom's gaze bore down on him, a silent but oppressive force. The scent of polished wood and old books filled the air, blending with the muted whispers from the prosecution's table. He could hear them snickering, their laughter like distant echoes in the vast chamber. The judge leaned back in his chair, his gavel tapping rhythmically against the polished surface of his bench. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth as he peered down at Ethan, his voice laced with condescension. "Do you even have a brain in that empty head of yours, or is it just empty space, dumb boy?" A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. The prosecution's lead attorney, a man with salt and pepper hair and an expensive suit, chuckled under his breath. Jurors exchanged glances, some smirking, others hiding their amusement behind their hands. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between Ethan and the judge. Ethan did not move. He did not wince. He did not even blink. He just waited. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, as if the entire room had stopped breathing. A moment passed, then another. Ethan's lips parted, his voice smooth, unwavering. "Your Honor, the measure of intelligence is not in the words of the powerful, but in the resilience of the unheard." The room stilled. The sneers faded, replaced by a quiet murmur of curiosity. The judge's smirk faltered. Ethan's voice carried, firm yet controlled. "You sit on that bench, cloaked in authority, believing your gavel gives you the right to belittle me. But tell me, Judge Morton, what does it say about a man who derives satisfaction from humiliating a child?" A sharp inhale from someone in the jury box. A shifting of weight from the prosecution's table. Judge Morton's fingers twitched around his gavel. "Watch yourself, son," he warned, but the bite in his tone lacked its usual venom. Ethan took a step forward. "I have been watching, Your Honor, watching how power is wielded in this room, how truth is twisted by those who think their voices matter more than mine. But let me make one thing clear. Intelligence is not defined by the color of my skin or the assumptions you make about my worth." The room was frozen in rapt attention. Ethan's gaze never wavered. "I will not be your spectacle, nor will I be your victim. You asked if I have a brain in my head." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I do, and today you will remember it." A stunned silence followed. The prosecution's laughter had vanished, their expressions replaced with something closer to unease. The jury members sat up straighter, their previous amusement erased. Even the court stenographer had stopped typing, eyes wide. Judge Morton swallowed, his throat bobbing. For the first time since Ethan had entered the courtroom, the power dynamics had shifted. Ethan Walker had not just spoken. He had commanded the room. "Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Have you ever been underestimated only to prove people wrong? Share your story." 3 weeks earlier, Ethan Walker was just another quiet kid, a boy who found comfort in the predictability of numbers, the logic of puzzles, and the complexity of codes. His room was a sanctuary of scattered equations, half-solved ciphers, and books on quantum mechanics. He spoke little, but his mind never stopped moving. To the world, he was invisible. To himself, he was unstoppable. His world shifted the moment he stumbled upon the case of Daniel Grayson, a man sentenced to life for a crime he did not commit. Ethan had not been looking for it. Just another late night spent browsing court records, testing his ability to crack encrypted files. But something in the details of Grayson's case caught his attention. A minor inconsistency. a piece of evidence that did not align with the official reports. At first, it was curiosity. Then it became an obsession. He dove deep, pulling files, cross-referencing testimonies, reconstructing timelines. The deeper he went, the clearer it became. Evidence had been tampered with. The justice system had failed. A man sat in a prison cell, his future erased by a lie. Ethan's hands shook as he stared at the screen, the undeniable proof staring back at him. He had uncovered something big, something dangerous. Determined, he tried to share his findings. He sent emails to law firms, presented his analysis to legal offices, even approached journalists. No one listened. Who would believe a kid? He was dismissed before he could finish his sentences, waved off as a bored teenager chasing conspiracy theories. Doors were closed before he could knock. He had the truth in his hands, yet no one cared enough to see it. But Ethan was not built to give up. He sharpened his research, honed his arguments, found ways to make his proof undeniable. He rehearsed what he would say if given a chance. Every rejection only fueled his determination. The world underestimated him, but that was their first mistake. Every night, he went back to the files. He read court transcripts until his eyes blurred, replayed the testimonies in his head like a broken record. He traced the evidence back to its source, over and over again, until he could recall every inconsistency without even looking. He was not just searching for proof. He was becoming part of the case itself. When he was not studying the files, he was practicing his words. He stood in front of his mirror, delivering arguments to his reflection, fine-tuning every sentence until it was undeniable. He analyzed courtroom speeches, watching how the best lawyers commanded attention. He learned how to dismantle false narratives, how to ask the right questions, how to make people listen. If no one would believe him now, he would make them believe him later. The rejection did not wear him down. It built him up. It made him sharper, stronger, more determined. He had uncovered a lie buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and indifference, and if no one else would expose the truth, he would do it himself. Ethan Walker was not just another quiet kid. He was a genius. Would you fight for justice, even if no one took you seriously? Let's talk. Ethan Walker refused to give up. He had spent weeks trying to expose the truth, and every door he knocked on had been slammed in his face. But if they would not listen, he would make them listen. He needed undeniable proof, something they could not ignore. Then he found it. Buried deep within the outdated court security system, hidden behind layers of weak encryption, was the truth he had been searching for. The evidence files were supposed to be sealed, locked away where no one could access them. But Ethan knew the system had flaws no one had bothered to fix. With careful precision, he bypassed the outdated firewalls, navigating through the layers of data like a surgeon with a scalpel. What he discovered was shocking. Manipulated timestamps, deleted footage, falsified reports. Someone had gone to great lengths to cover up the truth. The evidence that could have exonerated Daniel Grayson had been tampered with, erased from official records as if it had never existed. But Ethan had found it. He had proof that the system was corrupt, that an innocent man had been condemned because someone had wanted him to disappear. But exposing the truth came at a cost. Before he could present his findings, he was caught. The system flagged his access, triggering an alert. By the time he realized what had happened, it was too late. Authorities stormed his home, seizing his computer, his notes, everything. They did not ask questions. They did not care about the evidence he had uncovered. All they saw was a teenager who had hacked into a government system. They did not see a whistleblower. They saw a criminal. Ethan was arrested, handcuffed, dragged through the same halls where he had hoped to seek justice. His name was smeared in the media, labeled a hacker, a reckless kid who had broken the law. No one cared that he had been right. No one wanted to hear what he had found. Now, he stood in front of the judge. But he was not here as a witness. He was not here to present the truth. He was on trial, not for committing a crime, but for exposing one. The courtroom was silent. The prosecution painted him as a reckless teenager who had endangered national security. They ignored the evidence he had uncovered. They ignored the corruption he had exposed. All that mattered was that he had broken into the system. Ethan remained calm. He had always known this was a risk, but he also knew something else. He was not afraid. He had been underestimated before. They had called him a child. They had dismissed his words, but now, with the weight of truth behind him, he would not be silenced. He met the judge's gaze and spoke. "Do you think the system tries to silence the truth? Drop your thoughts below." Judge Morton leaned forward, his smirk unwavering. "You really think you're smarter than the entire justice system?" Ethan Walker did not flinch. His posture remained steady, his voice calm. "No, Your Honor, I just think I'm smarter than the people who tried to cover this up." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The sound of shuffling papers and hushed whispers filled the space. Even the prosecution exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence momentarily shaken. Ethan continued, his voice unwavering. "If you check Exhibit B, page 42, you'll see the security footage was altered. The original timestamp exists. I restored it." More murmurs. The defense attorney, who had been skeptical of Ethan's claims, suddenly flipped through the documents in front of him. His fingers trembled slightly as his eyes scanned the evidence. Then he stopped. His jaw tightened. Judge Morton's smirk faltered. "If you're lying, this will be perjury," he warned, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. "Then check the footage yourself." The courtroom was silent. Every eye was on the judge as he hesitated for the briefest moment before nodding toward the bailiff. Within minutes, a technician was called in to examine the footage. The minutes felt like hours as the file was retrieved, played, analyzed. Then the confirmation came. The footage had, in fact, been altered. Ethan had restored the original timestamp, revealing a truth that had been buried beneath layers of deception. A sharp intake of breath echoed from the prosecution's table. The lead attorney, who had been confident in his case, now looked visibly shaken. The defense attorney, once doubtful of Ethan's claims, straightened in his seat, realization dawning on his face. Judge Morton's expression darkened. The weight of the revelation was evident in his tightened grip on the gavel. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "How did you gain access to this information?" he asked, though the tone of his voice had shifted. It was no longer dripping with arrogance. It was cautious now, measured. Ethan's voice remained steady. "The truth was always there, Your Honor. It just needed someone willing to find it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan could feel the shift in the air, the sudden acknowledgement that he was no longer just a kid standing before the court. He was a force they had not anticipated. The prosecution scrambled to recover, but the cracks in their case were widening. The jury members exchanged glances, some of them nodding, others watching Ethan with newfound respect. The judge, now devoid of his earlier smirk, rapped his gavel once, calling for order. "We will reconvene after a full review of this evidence," he announced. Ethan exhaled slowly as the courtroom erupted in murmurs. He had not just presented a case, he had turned the entire trial on its head. "What would you do if you were in Ethan's position? Let's discuss." A hush fell over the courtroom as the footage played. Every eye was locked onto the screen, every breath held. Frame by frame, the truth unfolded. Everything Ethan Walker had said was true. The footage had been altered. The timestamps had been manipulated. The evidence against Daniel Grayson had been fabricated. It was undeniable now. Then the room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the low hum of disbelief spreading like wildfire. The jury members exchanged glances, some leaning forward, others whispering among themselves. The defense attorney ran a hand through his hair, a stunned expression on his face. Across the aisle, the prosecution's confidence crumbled before the entire courtroom. Their lead attorney flipped through the documents on his desk, scrambling for something, anything, to refute what had just been exposed. Judge Morton shifted uncomfortably. His earlier arrogance, the smug amusement he had worn like a shield, was gone. He had mocked a boy who had just unraveled a major injustice before his very eyes. He cleared his throat as if trying to regain his authority, but the damage had been done. The power in the room had shifted, and everyone knew it. The prosecution's panic deepened as more inconsistencies surfaced. Ethan had not just uncovered one mistake. His findings had blown open a door to something much larger. The judge turned to the prosecution. "Do you have an explanation for this?" Silence. The lead attorney clenched his jaw, rifling through his notes. There was nothing they could say, nothing they could do to undo what had just happened. The implications rippled through the courtroom like an earthquake. What had started as a single case, one wrongful conviction, was now revealing itself as something much bigger. A network of lies. A conspiracy stretching beyond a single prosecutor or detective. Ethan sat still, watching, as the case he had fought so hard to expose collapsed under its own corruption. His mind raced, connecting the dots faster than anyone else in the room. He had found more than just tampered evidence. He had stumbled upon something that reached far beyond Daniel Grayson. The trail led to powerful people, corrupt officials. A senator whose name now appeared in the altered files, tied to cases that should have never gone to trial. It was bigger than Ethan had imagined. The courtroom was no longer just focused on Daniel Grayson's case. It was focused on a system that had been rigged for far too long. And now, with the weight of truth pressing down on it, cracks were beginning to form. Judge Morton, now visibly uncomfortable, sighed heavily. "This court is adjourned until a full investigation is conducted." The sound of the gavel striking echoed through the room, but it did little to mask the realization that had settled over everyone present. Ethan had done more than prove a man's innocence. He had exposed a conspiracy. Do you believe the justice system protects the powerful? Let's talk. Ethan Walker's revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom, but the aftershocks reached far beyond those walls. What he had uncovered was not just one case of corruption. It was an entire network of deception, and powerful people were watching. Hours after the court adjourned, Ethan found himself walking alone, the adrenaline of the day still coursing through him. The victory was fresh, but something in the air felt different, tense. Office. That was when he noticed them. Men in dark suits. They appeared from the shadows of a quiet alleyway, their footsteps controlled, their presence deliberate. One of them, tall and expressionless, stepped forward. "You need to stop asking questions, kid." Ethan's heartbeat quickened, but he stood his ground. Or what? The man did not answer. Instead, he simply stared, as if waiting for Ethan to understand the weight of his own defiance. They had underestimated him in the courtroom. Now they were trying intimidation. But Ethan had already learned the most important lesson. Fear is a tool used to silence truth. He refused to back down. Instead, he turned to the media. With the help of Carter, a federal agent who had been following the trial closely, Ethan compiled every piece of evidence he had uncovered. The files, the footage, the names. It was all there, meticulously organized and ready to be exposed. The world needed to see what he had found. He leaked the documents. Within hours, the headlines exploded. News outlets ran the story nonstop. Social media ignited with outrage. The justice system had been caught protecting its own, shielding corruption under layers of bureaucracy. But now, the truth was out, and there was no containing it. The fallout was immediate. The senator implicated in the conspiracy was arrested, dragged from his office as cameras captured every moment. Protests erupted outside government buildings, demanding accountability. Investigations were launched into multiple wrongful convictions, exposing the full extent of the corruption Ethan had uncovered. And then there was Judge Morton. The same man who had once mocked Ethan now stood before the cameras, issuing a public apology. He had played his role in the system, dismissing voices that should have been heard. And now, with the weight of undeniable evidence against him, he had no choice but to acknowledge his failure. Ethan watched it all unfold, standing on the sidelines of the storm he had unleashed. He was no longer just the quiet kid who had been ignored, underestimated, or mocked. He was the boy who had taken on the system and won. Do you think exposing corruption is worth the risk? Let's talk about it.